Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and murderous cannibals hoping to chop you up. I'm Noah Hook, and today I'll finally be ranking all 9 of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films.
Hey, will somebody please pass the ketchup?
This is a tasty burger.
I'll take a Vornese burger and a side of Jason fingers.
Don't skimp on the meat. I got a real good eye for prime meat.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or TCM as I call it for short, is one of the most varied and inconsistent horror franchises of all time. It has some of the very best, including my favorite film of all time, but also some of the very worst films I've covered on the channel. It's similar to franchises like Halloween and Hellraiser, starting out with an incredible artistic vision by a truly talented director, but ultimately transforming into derivative slop made to sell tickets. It's also one of the least consistent franchises narratively as well. Almost every film ignores the sequels that came before, opting to start their own unique timeline or simply start from scratch. But despite this lack of cohesion and quality, one character has managed to stick around through all of the films and become a bona fide horror legend. I'm of course talking about Leatherface, the people-eating, chainsaw-toting, skin-wearing man-child who has been terrifying audiences since 1974. That's right, Leatherface has been slicing, dicing, and screaming his head off for over 50 years now. The franchise has often paired the character with some great murderous family members, but we all know Leatherface is the centerpiece of these films. Through the years, we've watched the iconic character defend his home, fall in love, become a parent, join the Illuminati, get rebooted a couple times, and become an old-ass man a couple of times. If nothing else, each of these films takes a pretty unique approach to Leatherface and his family, meaning no two films are going to give you the exact same experience. And I'm really excited to share my thoughts on this weird and mostly wonderful franchise. So this list is not necessarily my personal ranking of these films from worst to best. I'm trying to be a little bit more objective than that. There's obviously a ton that goes into this, but to break it down quickly, I'm looking for a few key things. First, the ambition of the movie, how much the writers, directors, and producers put into the script, plot, and originality. Second is the production quality, including things like the acting, cinematography, music, and set design. Third is the quality and continuation of Leatherface and the series, meaning how well the movie retains and creates the character's purpose and timeline, as well as how well it fits in with the rest of the franchise. Fourth is the quality of the special and visual effects, especially in relation to the kills. And finally, how scary and/or entertaining the final product actually is. I won't specifically be going into each one of those characteristics with each film, but they are a part of my judgment. If you want to hear my more fleshed out thoughts on each film, be sure to check out my review of each movie. But while I'm trying to look at the films objectively, it is impossible for certain things like my personal preference to not impact my list. These are just my opinions, and it's okay if you disagree with them. The Texas Chainsaw fanbase is super diverse and really opinionated. Everybody's list probably looks a little bit different, and that's totally okay and something that should be celebrated. Be sure to share your lists and opinions down in the comments with me, and I'd love to have a chat about it. Just be polite. Alright, I think I've covered my bases, so let's get to the rankings. Number 9. My choice for the worst film in the TCM franchise is one that admittedly took some big swings and tried to do a lot of different things here, but unfortunately a lot of them fell flat. My number 9 film is Leatherface. Co-directed by Julian Maury and Alexandre Bustillo, and written by Seth Sherwood, this 2017 horror film serves as a prequel to the original film and Texas Chainsaw 3D, sharing how Leatherface got his murderous start. In this version, a young Jed Sawyer is sent to a mental institution as a little boy, where his family is allowed zero contact. All is going relatively well until Verna breaks in and causes a riot that allows Jed and a couple other unstable teens to escape. With a nurse hostage in tow, the group leaves a bloody footprint across Texas as they evade a vengeful lawman on their way to Mexico. I've got a lot of mixed opinions on this film to the point where I kind of feel conflicted about having it in last place. I do think this is a technically better made film than a lot of the ones that are ahead of it. The cinematography, set design, and acting all feel much more polished. This is honestly one of the best looking TCM films. I also generally enjoy the narrative structure of the film, with a group on the run encountering various obstacles and environments. It's Texas Chainsaw's version of the Odyssey. And the dynamic between the runaways mostly works for me too. But my biggest issues were ultimately too hard to look past, which are that this just doesn't feel like a Texas Chainsaw film, and it doesn't function as a great origin story for Leatherface. It's not a bad story per se, but it's just way too far detached from everything we know about the character and the entire story. It's the same issue I have with Hannibal Rising. The writers decided to make this origin way too bombastic and over the top. This and 3D are doing too much to turn this story into a complex family drama involving generations of feuds with the Hartmans, and it's trying so hard to make the Sawyers less evil than every other Texan we meet. While Hartman, Ike, and Clarice work well as the villains in a general sense, I don't think it makes sense for a young Leatherface to be surrounded by a bunch of other people that are way crazier and way more evil. The film turns just about everyone and their mother into psychopaths. Jed, Drayton, Nubbins, Verna, and Grandpa don't stand out in the story, they just seem like your run-of-the-mill Texans amongst all the violent murderers we meet. It turns Leatherface into a sort of anti-hero, which just doesn't fit the character at all. I get that the creators wanted to lean into the distress and abuse that Leatherface goes through in the original, but it would have been way easier to just say Jed grew up with this fucked up family and that's why he's fucked up. But I do like the idea of making a young Leatherface who's a gentler soul and who struggles with the inherent violence that takes place in his family. Jackson does a great job of keeping his mental instability below the surface for the first 2/3 of the film, but his final reveal after the shooting really emulates the movements and dead stare of the original character. And that final chase sequence in the moonlit woods does feel right at home in this franchise. But all in all, Leatherface is not a film I return to very often. It's fine enough as a horror film, but as a Texas Chainsaw film, it leaves a lot to be desired for me. It has a ton of violence on display, most of which show off some great practical effects. It also has some of the best character development and genuine storytelling in the franchise, but it's a story that comes so far out of left field and deviates from everything we know about Leatherface. It answers questions nobody was asking and makes these answers way too over the top to make sense. At the end of the day, it's a Texas Chainsaw film that doesn't have Leatherface in it until the last 5 minutes. Need I really say more? Number 8. Up next is my personal least favorite film in the franchise, Texas Chainsaw 3D. Directed by John Lucenhop and written by Adam Marcus, this 2013 slasher primarily takes place 40 years after the events of the original film, following a long-lost Sawyer after the murderous clan was nearly decimated in the 70s. She learns about her cannibalistic lineage and inherits a beautiful home from a secret Sawyer grandma, so she and a group of friends travel to Texas to check out the new digs. Only trouble is that the town is still filled with the murderous vigilantes that killed most of her family, and the skin-wearing sole survivor of that massacre is living in the basement. I know some folks really like this one, but try as I might, I just don't see it. It's not that I think the movie is inherently that bad or anything, but it has a lot of dumb things that happen really early on that really shoot the movie in the foot before it can get going. The character of Heather is poorly casted and the character herself is poorly written. I'm not going to harp on it too much because every YouTube reviewer does it, but the bizarre discrepancies with Heather's age, the casting of Alexandra Daddario, and the timeline of the original film just showcases the sloppy writing involved. Heather's character arc is handled really poorly. She's raised by these redneck murderers that massacred her entire family, yet she's somehow completely well-adjusted socially, and prior to meeting Leatherface, she has zero signs of being a psycho, only for her to decide to embrace her skin-wearing cousin that quite literally murdered her friends. Not to mention, a lot of this film is very clearly shot on cheap-ass sets. Just look at these boring static shots of characters talking to each other in boring ass rooms. Without the audio, it just looks like shitty daytime television or like a movie shot on a Tubi budget. And even disregarding Heather's involvement in it, I just find this small town family feud bullshit so uninteresting. We already have an iconic, cool cannibal family with all the possibilities in the world to create new characters for it. Why replace them with a less cool, non-cannibal family? I just mentioned this while talking about Leatherface, but it also applies here. There have been a few films in this franchise where Leatherface isn't a straightforward bad guy, but turning him into some kind of anti-hero is just dumb. Making the other antagonists so evil that we're actively rooting for Leatherface just doesn't make sense to me. It takes all the scariness and horror out of this iconic character. But to be fair, the movie isn't all bad. The recreation of the Sawyer house actually looks really good, and these are probably my favorite cameos from the OG cast, way better than the ones in the next gen. Leatherface looks pretty good as well, and the kills that aren't CGI look really great. 3D also has a lot of so bad it's good quality. There is a lot of goofy shit, some of it's purposeful and some of it isn't, but I can usually find something to chuckle at throughout the film. I mean, the dialogue itself is so bad, it's hard to take anything here too seriously. It's a dumb, somewhat fun popcorn flick you can throw on and have a good time with. The films that came before, even the worst of the bunch, feel like somebody's passion project and it comes through on screen. This feels like a bland studio production, and that's because it is. It feels like a random spec script that they tossed Leatherface into. I think this film, Leatherface, the 2022 film, and a couple others prove Leatherface does not work as well on his own. He needs his zany, crazy family as support. Without them, he's just another silent slasher with little to make him stand out. All in all, Texas Chainsaw 3D is lacking the gritty Texas vibes and the maniacal family members, and it's too busy building out decades worth of boring lore to focus on a compelling story that happens in the present. It definitely has its fair share of funny, violent, and gory moments, so if you just want to see Leatherface hack people up, you can't go wrong with this one. It also pays a lot of homage to the original, and it's a more narrative-based film with more storytelling going on than the average TCM film, so if you're looking for that, you may get more out of it than me. But I'm sorry to say it's ultimately a film I don't enjoy, and I only watch it when I'm doing a binge of the entire franchise. Number 7. This film bounced around a few spots on the list for a while before ultimately landing here. There was a time where it was as high as number 5, and there was a time it was in dead last, but this ultimately made the most sense to me. My number 7 spot is going to Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2022. Directed by David Blue Garcia and written by Chris Devlin, the 9th and currently final film in the TCM franchise once again takes the direct sequel to the original route, taking place 50 years after the original film. Yes, the exact same thing we did with the last film, but let's do it again. It follows a group of influencers who have bought up a deserted Texas town with the goal of transforming it into the hip new place to be. Only trouble is, in the process, they unknowingly awaken the chainsaw-toting, human skin-wearing monster that has been hiding there since the 70s. With the help of lone survivor Sally Hardesty, the sisters try to stop Leatherface from tanking their property values for good. Yeah, this one's a bit of a stinker. There's definitely some good things happening, which I'll be sure to mention, but there's a lot here that I'm not a big fan of. I'll start with my biggest complaint, which is the film's absolutely abysmal use of Sally Hardesty. The writers just so clearly stole a page from the new Halloween trilogy, trying to turn an OG final girl into a wannabe Terminator badass. The whole idea didn't work for me in Halloween, and it is fucking unbearable here. Every line out of Sally's mouth is ridiculous. Nobody talks like that. And my big issue is the writers bringing Sally back just to murder her in the most anticlimactic way. Like, let's bring back a legacy character just to shit on that legacy. But outside of the Sally stuff, which I do want to stress is fucking terrible, there is some decent storytelling and character development here. I know the internet loves to hate on Melody, but I found her and Lila to be some of the more fleshed out final girls we've had in this franchise. Their story of not getting along and arguing, while also clearly caring for each other and ultimately joining forces, all works just fine for me. But outside of those two, I wish a lot of the other characters had some more time to be fleshed out. I appreciate the creators wanting to make a slick, fast-paced slasher, but I feel a little more character development for Jenny, Leatherface, Richter, and especially Sally would have gone a long way. I'm also not a fan of the film's really unclear, wishy-washy political themes. It simultaneously has zero nuance when it's talking about these political themes, but it also never actually takes a proper stance on any of the big discussion points that it's bringing up. If anything, the film uses the divided nature of our country for laughs, sort of like in The Hunt, and admittedly some of the jokes do land for me. But I really think the whole school shooting element is a bizarre inclusion, and it's critically underexplored and thematically unclear by the end. In my opinion, it's just not appropriate subject matter for the 9th straight-to-Netflix Texas Chainsaw film. On the technical side, this film is pretty solid though. The kills are heavy on practical effects and very bloody, and the cinematography really gets the shine here. I also like Leatherface's sad old lady look. This is the first time we've seen him wear the face of someone he loves, which is a really interesting idea that I wish was played with a bit more. There's also just a lot of really dumb plot stuff, like the whole premise of the film with them coming to buy this deserted Texas town makes no sense. Like, you're buying up a deserted ghost town, you're gonna put some crappy businesses in there, and how exactly are you going to make money when nobody lives there? Whatever. And just like the two films I discussed before, this one also makes the mistake of having Leatherface simply be a big silent slasher when that has never been the purpose of his character. He's not Michael or Jason, he's not meant to be a big silent murderer, he's fundamentally more interesting when he has his family to interact with. Sadly, this version of Leatherface is unmemorable 95% of the time. Texas Chainsaw Massacre has plenty of jokes about cancel culture and Confederate flags, but I don't think it ever commits to saying anything of value. It's a film that's really steeped in 2020's culture, which I think nobody's a huge fan of just because a lot of things going on around that time. So I don't think it's gonna age especially well. I don't have a huge issue with that because it's pretty clearly trying to have fun and not take itself too seriously, but the whole thing leaves me underwhelmed. I actually think it's the most overhated film in this franchise, but my ranking here also clearly indicates I don't think that highly of it. It works just fine as a fun, fast-paced slasher movie, but it otherwise feels like a hodgepodge of shit we've seen before, whether that be in a previous film or on the morning news. Number 6. Up next might just be my most controversial take on the list, as I imagine some of you have this a lot higher or a lot lower. My number 6 spot is gonna go to The Next Generation. Written and directed by Kim Henkel, this 1995 horror comedy, also known as The Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, takes this franchise fully into the 90s with a new brood of skin-wearing maniacs. This time around, some prom-skipping teens take a wrong turn in Chainsawville, and they proceed to get hunted down by a drag-wearing Leatherface, a hootin' and hollerin' Matthew McConaughey, and some fucking Illuminati members. Ugh, I'm sorry y'all, I wish I could tell you I like it or it's at least so bad it's good, but sadly it's mostly just bad. It's a step down from part 3 in pretty much every single way, and that one wasn't very good to begin with. The movie is ugly and uninteresting to look at. Almost the whole thing takes place at night, which could be okay if the film utilized shadows and darkness in smart or scary ways, but no, it's pretty much just underlit the whole time. Jenny is one of the least memorable final girls in the entire franchise. She doesn't get anything interesting to do. And that's a shame because she's one of the most likable characters here because everyone else is so fucking miserable. I know that teens are supposed to be these unlikable stereotype parodies of 90s kids, but they really aren't that different from the unlikable stereotype teens we got in the 80s. Barry and Heather do have some funny lines, Vilmer is at the very least memorable, and I actually really love Darla, she's the real highlight of the film for me. And at the risk of many dislikes, I actually like this rendition of Leatherface. The screaming can be a bit much, and they are hamming it up with a drag a bit too much, but this Leatherface feels the most like we got in the original. Yes, he's capable of brutal violence, but he's clearly the abusive family's maid and whipping boy. He's frightened by others and frightened by what he does to them, and I like my Leatherface to have that added layer of complexity. However, I do not like that Leatherface is basically a background character here. This shit is the Vilmer show through and through. And while Matthew McConaughey's character has some funny lines, memorable overacting, and he makes some very funny noises, I just don't find him to be compelling in the slightest. Gone is any nuance as to why they kill people. This version of the family is completely fine money-wise, they just kill people because they are crazy and work for the Illuminati. And that brings me to my biggest issue. Rothman's bizarre inclusion might just be worse than the Man in Black from Halloween 5. It feels like Henkel just couldn't figure out how to end this shit show. Not to mention the film's big bad was killed by a fucking airplane. Deep down, there's probably some metaphor for the awful things the US government's been doing to people for decades, but it was handled way too sloppily for me to appreciate it. But that's not to say that TCM4 is not worthy of a watch. This thing is so incoherent and rambling that it does become interesting. Not good, but interesting. The Sawyers are now the Slaughters, cannibals are ordering pizza, Matthew McConaughey has a completely unexplained robotic leg controlled by a remote control. Leatherface has borrowed Buffalo Bill's woman suit, the new matriarch is sporting a purple 90s power suit. Another family member can only speak in quotes from famous philosophers, and nobody throughout the entire film gets cut with a chainsaw. All in all, the next gen is a big mess, but I can understand if you get more entertainment value out of it than me. It's filmmaking at some of its lowest, which actually feels more at home in this franchise than some of the glossy crap that comes later. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's unpleasant, sometimes it's absolutely ludicrous, but if nothing else, it's always memorable. Number 5. Up next is the film that I would describe as the most middle-of-the-road, mediocre Texas Chainsaw film. That glowing endorsement goes to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. Directed by Jeff Burr and written by David Chow, this 1990 slasher film follows a young yuppie couple who are traveling through Texas when they witness a shooting at a rural gas station. They flee down a supposed shortcut that leads them to Leatherface and his new murderous family members. While on the run, they meet a local survivalist who may be their only shot at getting out alive. Similar to part 4, I wish I could tell y'all I enjoy this film more, but it ultimately ends up being just okay. It's really a step down from the first 2 films in a big way. The protagonists are pretty bland and unlikable. Michelle has some surface level character growth between the armadillo and being able to smash Leatherface, but it's just a carbon copy of the themes from something like The Hills Have Eyes. Ken Foree comes through and helps with this issue a bit, cause who doesn't love Ken Foree? But even Benny is around to serve the plot more than he is providing personality. I would say the villains themselves are the film's strongest point. Tex and Tinker are interesting additions that feel at home with the previous Sawyers without being total retreads. I don't get as much from Alfredo, Mama, and the little girl though. Alfredo is kind of just a general vulgar redneck, and the ladies simply don't get enough screen time to really stand out. I don't hate this version of Leatherface, it's a pretty different interpretation from the first two films, but it is perhaps the most impactful one. I love Leatherface when he's a scared, confused, abused guard dog that his family coaxes into committing horrible acts. That to me is way more interesting than turning him into another Jason or Michael. The whole point of this film was to transform him into a generic slasher monster, and that subsequently turns this previously indie kind of art house franchise into a studio-run, run-of-the-mill slasher. This is the film that sets the precedent for Leatherface being a big, angry, evil monster that kills people for fun. And that's okay, it certainly is what kept this franchise around for so long, but amongst the big, brutal Leatherfaces, I wouldn't say Part 3 is the best version of that either. But Part 3 does have some strong elements as well though. You've obviously got some very talented actors here. Getting to see Viggo Mortensen a decade before Lord of the Rings playing this crazy hillbilly is super fun. Generally, I think the cinematography is a bit of a downgrade, but there are some really nice shots utilizing the desert landscape and the boggy swamps. This one is obviously more self-serious than Part 2, but there is some nice dark humor sprinkled in throughout. Leatherface also looks pretty solid here. He's got a gritty, really gross mask to match his amped up anger. Michelle starts off very bland, but by the finale she is ripping her hands off the chair she's nailed to, putting up a great fight against Leatherface, and she's the one to finally put down Alfredo. She puts up more of a fight for a longer period than even Stretch, and she's definitely one of the toughest final girls in the franchise. But at the end of the day, Part 3 is probably the most forgettable film in the whole franchise. It's outclassed and outcrafted by the best films, but there are also films that come later that are more memorable because they are so much worse. Part 3 ups the depravity, but we'll soon check out films that push the envelope to even more fucked up territory. All of this leaves Part 3 without its own specific voice or vision. It does have some solid kills, a fun soundtrack, and some quirky characters. It really doesn't do anything bad enough for me to hate it or even want to shit on it. It's just run-of-the-mill. It ultimately feels like a more generic commercial studio production version of Texas Chainsaw when it really needs to be under the helm of a really dedicated writer and director that's really into the project. Number 4. Alright, we've made it into the top half of the list. This is a film I enjoy, but it's still not one I really feel like transcends into greatness. If anything, I think this and Part 3 are the cusp films that separate the crap from the really good stuff. This middle of the road position goes to TCM The Beginning. Directed by Jonathan Liebesman and written by Sheldon Turner, this 2006 prequel takes place 4 years before the events of the 2003 remake, showing us the events that created the chainsaw-wielding, people-eating Hewitt family. The film follows a pair of brothers and their girlfriends on a road trip to see the boys off as they head to the Vietnam War. But their plans change when they cross paths with Sheriff Hoyt and Leatherface, who are just starting to patent their own backwoods brand of terror. Overall, I would say this one is fine. It retains a lot of the good qualities from the 2003 remake, but it's still really only a film I watch when I'm doing a proper binge of the series. But at the very least, it's competently made, has likable characters, and it still has a scary fucking Leatherface. I do miss the artistic flourishes of Marcus Nispel and Daniel Pearl's cinematography, but this is still one of the better looking TCM films. It's also well acted. Arlie Ermey once again steals the show, but our foursome of protagonists bring a lot of personality to these characters that could have easily been paper-thin archetypes. But where the movie seems to lose a lot of people is in its tone. This thing is fucking bleak. It's 4 nice people being viciously tortured for 90 minutes without any of the catharsis that comes with the usual hero's revenge. The remake was already a very big jump from its predecessors when it comes to gore and cruelty, and The Beginning manages to outdo that here. This series has always been centered around terrorizing women, but the direction they went with Bailey is just way too far for me to have any kind of fun with. But other than that, I don't find myself too bothered by most of the torture sequences. Dean's push-up beating feels very in character for Hoyt, and the addition of his military background adds to his mad with power persona. Eric's death is definitely hard to watch, but the way Leatherface treats him like a frog in biology class feels reminiscent of how many serial killers got their start with animals and escalated from there. In my opinion, most Texas Chainsaw films are better off trying to be scary than funny. This is definitely the meanest, least fun film of the franchise. And while I can see that being a big turnoff for some people, it does give the film something decently unique that sets it apart from its peers. But other than being particularly unpleasant, I'm not sure the beginning has that much to offer as far as novelty within the franchise goes. Sure, it's kinda cool to see this version of Leatherface get his murderous start, but the plot of this film is basically the same as the remake all over again. It's a lot of the same characters in the same locations with largely the same tone and events taking place. Although I will say if you watch them in reverse order, this film does work as a great setup for what happens in the remake. All in all, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning serves as a pretty solid prequel to the remake, and in the grand scheme of this franchise, I would say it's one of the better films. It's a bleak, torturous, sepia-toned nightmare that pulls zero punches all the way through. You could watch it on its own without issue, but I still think it requires a viewing of the remake for a lot of this film's moments to have any impact or importance. But either way, you are guaranteed to get some of the absolute most violent and cruel kills to ever come out of a big-name studio's production. It's very much a product of its time, coming right in the heat of the torture porn subgenre that its predecessor helped establish. It's fast, mean, pretty scary, occasionally sloppy with its cuts, but largely an effective slasher film. I could understand if it's one of your favorites or least favorites in the franchise, simply depending on what you look for in a Texas Chainsaw film. Number 3. Alright, we finally made it to the big 3. In this entire franchise, these are truly the only 3 films that I can say are objectively really good. All 3 of these films give you really different experiences, so I can imagine you maybe not liking at least one of the 3, but I think that these 3 are the best at giving you a particular type of Texas Chainsaw, which is ultimately what I'm looking for. But all things considered, I'm gonna give the bronze medal to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. Directed by Marcus Nispel and written by Scott Kozar, this 2003 horror film has a lot of the same bones as the original, following a group of young adults who come across Leatherface and his murderous clan while traveling through Texas. Only this group likes Lynyrd Skynyrd and has a lot more sex appeal. This time around, Leatherface is a big, mean, scary killing machine, and his cruel family members like Sheriff Hoyt are nearly as terrifying. Overall, this is a film I always enjoy when I revisit it. I have to be in the mood for a pretty brutal, pessimistic film, but I found that I enjoy those a bit more than the average person. Funnily enough, I think the movie succeeds most when it's not remaking. I like when it's pushing into new territory. For me, Sheriff Hoyt is what makes this film. His sadistic brand of cruel, dark humor really sets the tone. Out of all the TCM characters, I think Hoyt is the last one I'd want to run into. R. Lee Ermey was perfect casting for this guy. He's a great partner in crime and father figure to Leatherface, who also is super intimidating here. This is by far the scariest depiction of what it would be like to get killed with a chainsaw. Where the original has a less is more subtle kind of approach, this is a movie that just bombards you with violence at every turn. But it isn't entirely a schlockfest either. There are some downright beautiful shots throughout the film. Some of them are borrowed from the original, but I do think Nispel and Pearl did a fantastic job capturing the beauty of the surrounding nature. Plus, there are a few stellar shots of Leatherface. That one where he's wearing Kemper's face is so unsettling. And Erin makes for a really great final girl here. She has a surprising amount of depth and is genuinely likable, which makes it super easy to root for her against these monsters. She's realistically terrified most of the time, but builds the bravery and adrenaline to fight back. I'd also say this one is only behind the original two when it comes to set design. This movie is dirty, wet, and stinky in all of the worst and best ways. The moment where Leatherface first appears, whenever Erin is hiding from him, and the fake out with Erin hotwiring the cop car are all super suspenseful. But with all that said, the TCM remake ultimately isn't a film that I feel super passionately about the way I do the next two films. I ultimately just really value originality, so there really aren't any 2000s remakes that will ever enter my favorite films of all time. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a truly unique experience, whereas the remake feels like a kind of generic slasher movie. A really good one, don't get me wrong, but a generic slasher movie nonetheless. This one does have a lot of bite to match its bark, unlike a lot of the others that become overly commodified or even turn into PG-13 crap. This was kind of a pioneer for excessively graphic violence in horror films. So while it isn't a personal favorite or anything, I have come to respect the remake a lot, more than I ever expected to. All in all, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a pretty solid remake and a pretty solid horror film in its own right. It's a brutal, gory, vicious movie with a lot of violence on display. It has an effective, tense atmosphere, solid cinematography and set design, a fantastic final girl in Erin, a great new villain in Sheriff Hoyt, and a terrifying version of Leatherface. Number 2. My silver medal is going to a film that most people really enjoy, but it is known to have a few people that really hate it as well. I'm of course talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Directed by Tobe Hooper and written by L.M. Kit Carson, this 1986 horror comedy sequel takes a very different approach than the 1974 original, departing from its art house roots to make a bloody, disgusting schlockfest. The film follows a radio host named Stretch who unwittingly gets the attention of the murderous Sawyer family when she plays the audio of them killing some kids across the tri-state area. Along with a vengeful sheriff, she enters the lair of Leatherface, the cook, a new brother named Chop Top, and of course, good old Grandpa for a face-wearing, chainsaw-dueling, chili competition-winning bloodbath. I think TCM2 is so much fun. Seeing Hooper go so far in a different direction from the original can be a bit jarring. It admittedly makes for a really strange back-to-back watch, but I just love it so much for how balls to the wall crazy it really is. It's far too often that the sequel to a successful horror film is just a carbon copy with little new to add. When you look at Hooper's filmography, this film actually feels more at home than the original in a lot of ways. It feels like a sibling to Eaten Alive or The Funhouse, where the sheer absurdity of the plot is used to its comedic advantage. The original TCM does have humor, but it's often overlooked due to its overwhelmingly bleak nature. This time around, the uncomfortability is traded for zingers, the art house style is replaced with a more traditional studio feel, and the off-screen violence is set right in front of the camera. Bill Moseley as Chop Top is an absolute joy to watch. He is really what keeps me coming back for more. The head plate, the pale green skin, the hilarious quips and impressions, the constant references to Vietnam, and so many other little details make Chop Top one of the most unique villains in all of horror. Drayton also gets a bit of an upgrade from the original. I'm glad the character gets a lot more screen time and personality, but the character still remains true. Grandpa gets a nasty facelift as well, and I love that they keep the hitchhiker's body and use it as a puppet. I think that's what he would have wanted. Stretch works so well as the movie's final girl. She's smart, funny, tough, but still vulnerable and has a hell of a scream. Caroline Williams crushes it in this role. But I'll be honest in that I feel the character of Lefty was a little wasted by the end. His last 5 minutes or so are fantastic, but before then he's almost entirely off screen or not doing anything of note. He does have some great quotes though. And the film does have some pacing issues. There is quite a bit of time where either Stretch or Lefty are just walking around the underground lair. It feels like a little fat could have been trimmed from the final product. I know it's not for everyone, but I really love this weird, horny version of Leatherface. The film really plays into the trope of the slasher weapon representing manhood, masculinity, and the phallic image. I especially love listening to the cook describe sex as, well, nobody really knows. These boys haven't felt the willing touch of a woman for a long time, and it shows. The movie is also so fucking Texas. You got chainsaw stores, 10-gallon hats, chili cook-offs, tailgate parties, and so many little locations and scenes that really show both so much love and disdain for the fucked up state that Hooper comes from. The Sawyers have set up shop in an abandoned theme park celebrating Texas's violent, war-filled history. It's the perfect setting for a bunch of derelict men to wallow in their own depravity, surrounded by intestine-filled Davy Crockett murals and a grenade in case their brutality ever fails them. It's Hicksploitation at some of its finest. It's a movie that throws logic out the window and opts to have some ridiculous fun. It's a world where cannibals can win chili cook-offs, sheriffs fight chainsaw-wielding villains with chainsaws of their own, and of course a world where the small businessman takes it in the ass every time. All in all, TCM 2 is a horror comedy that really subverts every single expectation that I would have had for it, but in the best way possible, becoming a truly great film in its own right. Number 1. Sorry, this is a bit of an obvious and anticlimactic number 1, but if y'all know anything about me, it's that my all-time favorite film is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Written and directed by Tobe Hooper, this 1974 independent horror film follows a pair of siblings and their young hippie friends as they set out to investigate the desecration of their grandfather's grave in rural Texas. But their idyllic road trip turns into a nightmare when the group encounters a group of depraved, murderous outcasts living next to their family's old farmhouse. As the group is attacked one by the skin-wearing, chainsaw-wielding Leatherface, the survivors must do everything they can to escape with their lives and limbs intact. Oh boy, do I love this film, and I find something new to love every single time I watch it. There are very few horror films that I truly say are their own unique experience, but I really believe that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is in its own special world. Every single shot in this film is so purposeful and beautiful, even if it's a fucked up bone sculpture kind of beautiful. This film is sweaty, dusty, and grimy and filthy. You feel like you're there under the beaming Texas sun and trapped inside that disgusting corpse-filled house. The sound design is especially unique, and it's gone on to be a huge influence on horror films to this day. Leatherface and his deranged family make such great antagonists, and their respective actions and dynamics are packed with so much meaning. The whole film is one giant critique of American government, capitalism, and traditional values. It's a rumination on the corroding, crumbling, rotting, dug-up corpse of the American dream. The workers of the slaughterhouse have been replaced by machines. The sledgehammer has been replaced by the bolt gun. Idle hands are the devil's playthings, and the cook, the hitchhiker, and Leatherface fell even deeper into their own depravity as the world around them collapsed. With nothing new to do or see, what else were they gonna do but dig up some skeletons? The Sawyers exist in a primitive, archaic nightmare rooted in their supposedly glorious past. That's why they worship Grandpa, the half-dead patriarch who is the ultimate symbol of everything that is opposite to the young, hopeful hippies they are brutalizing. The violence of the old world may have a new look, but it has been passed down nonetheless. Whether it's a hammer or a bolt gun, the cows still get slaughtered. Through the Sawyers, we also witness the bastardization of the American nuclear family, specifically the damage brought on within a group of barbaric men. The cook, despite being a brother as well, has taken on the role of father to the other two. The hitchhiker is like a rebellious son, and Leatherface is forced into the stereotypical role of woman. This is why he shifts to the face, outfit, and demeanor of a woman by nightfall when he knows the abusive cook is returning home. Leatherface likely has some kind of mental disability based on his inability to speak beyond grunts, and his abusive brothers have essentially trained him to be an attack dog who protects the property. He is arguably a victim in all of this too, as he truly seems terrified after killing Kirk, Pam, and Jerry. The film is also one of the most convincing arguments for vegetarianism I've ever seen. There are only a couple shots of real cows, but they depict them in such a depressing, doomed way that it hits really hard. And that same sense of doom is projected onto the hippies as they wander through the proverbial slaughterhouse. They have left behind the logical, ethical world they know, finding themselves in a world where their lives are worth nothing beyond the meat on their bones. Their bones will probably be used as well, to be fair. Hooper has an incredible sense of black humor and irony that occasionally shine through the intensity, providing little moments of levity that help the film from being a total downer. The supposedly kind hippies kind of treat Franklin like shit and constantly leave him out, while the Sawyers carefully carry their wheelchair-using family member downstairs so he can join the festivities. We may prattle on about peace and love, but we shouldn't throw stones at farmhouses while we live in glass ones. For me, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the ultimate horror film. It is an unwavering, unbending vision. It's a 90-minute window into a straight-up American Gothic nightmare filled with nothing but agony and depravity. Every single actor fills their role perfectly, and Marilyn Burns in particular steals the show in that third act. It features some incredible cinematography, sound design, editing, and set design. It is an unpleasant, sadistic, cruel film that pulls zero punches while also being really minimal with the guts and gore. It lets our imaginations do the heavy lifting. And despite Sally's survival, it denies us any happy endings or catharsis. It's a meat grinder that will keep on grinding even if you escape it, as there will always be more hapless youths who will fall into it. I understand that it's definitely not a film for everyone, but it has a very special place in my heart, and I truly do think it is the best film that this franchise has to offer, and very clearly one of the best horror films of all time. If you somehow haven't seen the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, please do yourself a favor and go watch it immediately. And there you have it. Those are my rankings for the Texas Chainsaw franchise. Do you agree with my list? Disagree? Let me know down in the comments. Truthfully, it's hard as hell to put 9 movies in order from worst to best. These films move around for me all the time, but I think that this list is a good way to illustrate my overall thoughts on each of them. Everybody I talk to has a really different list, so please be sure to share your rankings and thoughts with me down below. I'd love to talk about them. And if you want to hear more of my thoughts on each of these films, be sure to go watch my full reviews of them. They'll be a lot more in depth. Well, that's about it. Regardless of quality, it has been so much fun to cover my favorite film of all time and the wacky franchise that would come to follow it. Thank you all so much for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks so much for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching me rank all 9 Texas Chainsaw films. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks y'all.